Tonight at 10, we're live in Washington as Donald Trump celebrates a stunning victory over Hillary Clinton in the US presidential election. He greeted his supporters in the early hours as President-elect of the United States, promising to heal the nation's wounds after a vicious campaign.
I pledge to every citizen of our land that I will be president for all Americans, and this is so important to me.
Among Republicans, there was jubilation as pollsters were confounded and Trump swept a victory in several battleground states.
I love the guy. I think he's been mischaracterized by the media through the entire thing. You know, if I believed what the media was saying, I wouldn't be here.
It was a crushing defeat for Hillary Clinton and the end of her dream to become the first woman to occupy the Oval Office.
This loss hurts, but please never stop believing that fighting for what's right is worth it.
Democratic Party workers were urged by the president to keep faith and to give the new president a chance.
We are now all rooting for his success in uniting and leading the country. The peaceful transition of power is one of the hallmarks of our democracy.
You're fired.
And we'll be charting the rise of the television celebrity and businessman to the most powerful office in the world. And the day's other main story, at least 7 people died and dozens were injured when a tram overturned in Croydon in South London.
Here in the south, a 24-year-old soldier is arrested after 2 promising athletes are hit by a car and killed. And a bitter pill to swallow, pharmaceutical giant Pfizer axes 270 jobs in Hampshire.
Good evening from Washington, D.C., where the political landscape has been redrawn by Donald Trump's astounding election victory over Hillary Clinton. The Republican businessman and political outsider with no experience of public office defied all the polls to defeat his Democratic rival. After one of the most venomous campaigns in history, Mr. Trump promised to be a president for all Americans. He will move into the White House next year. Early this morning, Mr. Trump produced one of the biggest upheavals in US political history, beating Hillary Clinton in the Electoral College by 279 votes to 228. The Republicans also took control of Congress. But the popular vote tells a different story. Mrs. Clinton attracted slightly more votes nationwide than Donald Trump. Tonight, we'll have the story of the results as they came in. We'll be reporting from Florida and from the border with Mexico. We'll have reaction from around the world, and we'll be asking what kind of presidency Donald Trump will deliver. But first tonight, our North America editor John Sopel reports on Donald Trump's historic victory.
Enter Donald J. Trump. Sorry, President Trump, as he will be in January. This is the most momentous and unexpected election victory in America's 240-year history. And at a stroke, it seemed the street fighter insurgent had given way to the statesman.
Now it's time for America to bind the wounds of division. Have to get together. To all Republicans and Democrats and independents across this nation, I say it is time for us to come together as one united people. It's time. I pledge to every citizen of our land that I will be president for all Americans, and this is so important to me.
And having been accused of racism during his campaign and targeting minorities, another new tone.
For those who have chosen not to support me in the past, of which there were a few people, I'm reaching out to you for your guidance and your help so that we can work together and unify our great country.
And his opponent, whom he'd put to the sword, was no longer crooked Hillary, the woman who should be in prison, the most corrupt politician ever. She was this.
I've just received a call from Secretary Clinton. She congratulated us, it's about us, on our victory. And I congratulated her and her family on a very, very hard-fought campaign. I mean, she fought very hard. Hillary has worked very long and very hard over a long period of time, and we owe her a major debt of gratitude for her service to our country. I mean that very sincerely.
The outsider had taken on the establishment and won. According to exit polls, winning massively among white working-class men, but also a majority of white women, and faring no worse with Hispanics than his predecessor did 4 years ago. His supporters were ecstatic.
I mean, I'm from Austin, Texas. I love the guy. I think he's been mischaracterized by the media through the entire thing. You know, if I believed what the media was saying, I wouldn't be here. But I can see through the fog, and I trust the man.
We're going to get back to what we need to, which is God, faith, and country, and get back to the morals that we need to raise our children.
But not everybody was so happy. Donald Trump watched from his penthouse as the votes were counted. He'd promised Brexit Plus. Not only did he deliver that, there was an uncanny symmetry about the way the night unfolded. Hillary HQ could have been vote Remain. So much early optimism, only to be replaced by mounting gloom and then despair. People heading home before the final results were known.
I am extremely disappointed. I, along with many Americans, anticipated a much different result.
Late last night, Barack Obama issued a video message saying that whatever you're feeling right now, the sun will still rise tomorrow. It did. He was right. But this is an election that has left many, many people feeling deeply apprehensive and a huge number feeling wildly optimistic. We'll soon discover whether the apprehension or the optimism are justified.
Hillary Clinton made a statement to her supporters in New York this morning. Her hope of making history dashed.
Last night, I congratulated Donald Trump and offered to work with him on behalf of our country. I hope that he will be a successful president for all Americans. This is not the outcome we wanted or we worked so hard for, and I'm sorry that we did not win this election for the values we share and the vision we hold for our country. And to all the little girls who are watching this, never doubt that you are valuable and powerful and deserving of every chance and opportunity in the world to pursue and achieve your own dreams.
And from the White House, President Obama promised his full cooperation to the president-elect.
And one thing you realize quickly in this job is that the presidency and the vice presidency is bigger than any of us. So I have instructed my team to follow the example that President Bush's team set 8 years ago and work as hard as we can to make sure that this is a successful transition for the president-elect. Because we are now all rooting for his success in uniting and leading the country.
A new and astonishing page in American history has been turned. We know what Donald Trump's policy ambitions are, but bringing the country together after so much division and hatred will be his greatest challenge. John Sopel, BBC News, New York.
Well, Donald Trump had been trailing in the opinion polls for most of the election campaign, but he continued to make a strong appeal to working-class voters and, as John was saying there, frequently denounced Hillary Clinton as a liar and a criminal. Mr. Trump will be the first president since General Eisenhower over 60 years ago to occupy the Oval Office with no previous experience of elected public office. Our chief correspondent, Gavin Hewitt, has this assessment of Mr. Trump's unconventional journey to the White House.
The man who will become the 45th President of the United States is a political outsider. His background, property development, branding glitzy buildings with the name Trump. He was a showman, drawn to reality TV and the program The Apprentice.
You're fired.
17 months ago, he descended a New York escalator and declared he was running for president, never having held public office. It seemed an impossible journey. Among his supporters, there were doubts about his strategy.
Called by the Fox News decision desk.
But Donald Trump successfully targeted the white working class, and the crowd sensed a Brexit moment building.
The pollsters in this country were telling us up until this very morning that Trump didn't stand a chance, that it would be a miracle. It was such a hard road. This is Brexit in America.
And then success in Florida. Hillary Clinton had outspent him. Yes, the Democrats had targeted Hispanic voters and women, but Donald Trump did better than expected among almost all groups, building a mass movement.
This means that Donald Trump will be the 45th President of the United States.
When his victory was announced, there were wild celebrations. He wasn't a normal Republican candidate. This was about taking back the country. This is an extraordinary moment in American history. A people's revolt against the political establishment in Washington. A man who has never held public office before is now heading to the White House. So how did he do it? I spoke to Donald Trump's son, Eric.
6 months.
How did you do it? What was the secret?
He's unbelievable. He is so unbelievable. I'm so proud of him. He is just such an incredible guy, and what a night this is. What an amazing night. So.
And then I asked his campaign manager about their strategy.
The best strategy was to never give up and never give in, and to realize that when you're criticized constantly, when you have these darker days in the campaign, that's just a test of the type of resilience and fortitude that a leader must have.
And the verdict of one of his chief advisors.
This is the people rising up and saying, we've had enough of that rotten government in Washington. Drain the swamp, fix it, clean it up. He'll be able to do that.
For several weeks, I crisscrossed America following the Trump campaign, his branded plane used as a campaign prop. He consistently drew large crowds, encouraged to break into chants like "Lock her up" against Hillary Clinton. He discarded the usual rules of politics, feeding off grievances and sneering at the elites.
They are the worst.
As president-elect, he has promised to heal divisions, some of which he caused himself by labeling opponents disgusting and liars. He will preside over a republic divided. This political earthquake was much more than just bringing jobs back. It went deeper. It was about identity, about reclaiming a sense of an earlier, simpler America, more certain of its power. And Donald Trump tapped into that.
History. Made history.
Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, New York.
Well, the results overnight showed that Hillary Clinton had failed to maximise her support among women and minority communities, while Mr. Trump certainly succeeded in maximising his vote, especially among older white men. Our correspondent Ali Makboul has spent the day getting reaction to the Trump victory in Staten Island, New York.
Donald Trump talked of the forgotten men and women of America making their voices heard this election, especially for those in industries that have suffered tough economic times. That's certainly how many say they felt as the astonishing results poured in.
I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and my friends are calling me from all over the country. And this morning I finally woke up to, 15 text messages from all over the country. Everybody was so excited. And with good cause.
Everyone at this small construction firm said they felt angry about issues only Donald Trump could resolve, particularly immigration.
I think that you should take care of your own people before you allow other people to come and we weren't doing that. I think there should be something in place that checks people better before we allow them into our country because of the terrorism, and I want my children and grandchildren protected.
Well, as we've crossed this country in recent weeks, we've heard from many, particularly from the white working classes, who said they were going to vote this time round when they had never bothered before. So energized were they by the message of Donald Trump. Trump, of course, has got no political experience, but that's precisely why his supporters here say they expect him to achieve big things.
I like to see the political change that he's promising. You know, the political machine that's in Washington I've never been happy with, and I think we have something to look forward to.
A few miles down the road, though, a pocket of Staten Island where people are now apprehensive about the future. Fewer than 1 in 10 black voters chose Trump.
He's like racist. He's racist. I see how he talks. He doesn't like African Americans. It's hard being a black woman, a Latino woman, a person of color in this country as it is, and for someone who doesn't understand that, I don't really take too kindly to him.
People here told us they feared if Donald Trump didn't show respect to minorities, his supporters would feel they could do the same. Right now, those very Trump supporters are enjoying a sense of unexpected joy, but a bruising campaign has exposed profound divisions in American society that will need healing. Aleem Maqbool, BBC News on Staten Island.
Well, the result, without doubt, was a crushing defeat for Hillary Clinton. Her own team was still making very confident noises during polling day yesterday, and it's the end of her dream of becoming the first female president in US history, having already served, of course, as Secretary of State under President Obama. Our North America correspondent, Nick Bryant, has been looking at the factors which led to Hillary Clinton's defeat.
She's been a First Lady, a Senator, a globe-trotting Secretary of State. But what made Hillary Clinton think she was uniquely qualified to be president, her decades of Washington experience, actually proved to be a weakness. So rather than shattering that famed glass ceiling, she was portrayed as the face of America's broken politics. In the early hours of the morning, it was broken hearts when news came through that her long quest for the White House was over.
Supporters came here expecting a party, and already it's turned into a post-mortem. This was a revolt against the political establishment. And for Donald Trump's supporters, Hillary Clinton personifies the political establishment.
To understand why Hillary Clinton lost, you need to leave behind her political home in New York and travel to the skeletal old plants of the Rust Belt, where the post-industrial landscape provided a seedbed in the selection of economic discontent and anti-establishment rage. Here in Pennsylvania, a state she unexpectedly lost, people weren't queuing to vote, they were waiting for food handouts. And in what was once a Democratic stronghold, they've lost faith with politics as usual.
We've had enough of what's going on for the last 20 years. I think we need to change.
Trump all the way. Trump trained.
Why is it that Donald Trump has such appeal in these communities?
He's a businessman.
But Hillary Clinton is a career politician. Even as a teenager, she ran for president of the Student Council. She was a star campus activist in the 60s. But the more political she became, the less people seemed to trust her.
You know, I'm not sitting here as some little woman standing by my man like Tammy Wynette.
So when it emerged that she'd used a private email server during her years as Secretary of State, it crystallized long-standing feelings of mistrust and hatred.
I'm running for president.
When she launched the campaign for president, she tried to repackage herself, to soften her image.
So I'm hitting the road to earn your vote.
But she's not a natural campaigner, and she struggled to connect with voters.
It's a nail biter.
At this year's anniversary of September the 11th, there was a stumble, in the most literal sense of all.
Secretary, how are you feeling?
Great. I'm feeling great.
Donald Trump claimed she didn't have stamina. Misogynistic code, it sounded like, for a woman isn't strong enough to be president.
Thank you.
Hillary Clinton once described herself as the most unknown known person in the world, and friends say her public persona is very different from the woman you meet in private. But we'll be seeing a lot less of a figure who's been such a fixture for so many decades. Her long political career is surely over, ending in a rented ballroom, rather than the grandeur of the White House. Nick Bryant, BBC News, New York.
Let's talk a little more about the Trump victory. Let's go straight to New York and our North America editor, John Sopel. And John, what is your take on the way that Donald Trump and his team constructed this remarkable victory here?
At the start of the whole process, Hugh, in Iowa in January, when it was freezing cold, I met Donald Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., and he said of his billionaire father, you know, the thing about him is he's a blue-collar worker just with a better bank balance. What Donald Trump identified was these concerns about middle America, where they felt they had been left behind by the elite in Washington. Washington wasn't concerned about their jobs, wasn't concerned about immigration, wasn't concerned about the kind of failing systems around them, and that no one really cared. And Donald Trump identified that as a central issue and got huge support for saying these things and being very anti-Washington. The second thing is, if you look at the polls in the final weeks, they recognise that Donald Trump is a deeply flawed character. They don't have particular high views on his integrity, his behaviour, his trustworthiness, but they think he's an agent of change, and people wanted change above everything else. I think the final thing that Donald Trump had going for him in this was a stubborn belief that the polls, just like in Brexit, were wrong, so that all the time when he could see these huge crowds turning up at his rallies, and yet the papers saying support is on the wane for him, he never believed it, he carried on, and sure enough, he has confounded all the experts.
A little later, John, I'll be back with you and we'll talk about the shape of the Trump presidency as you see it. But for now, thanks very much, John Sopel there in New York. So as the results came in overnight, there was, of course, a massive information about the presidential race and also the crucial race for seats in Congress, which also led to victory for the Republicans. Jeremy Vine was tracking all the results as they came in.
How did Donald Trump build his support? Was he divisive, or did he do this by actually building coalitions? Let's look at some of the figures that came out from this election. So, for example, among men and women, clearly he was more popular among male voters than Hillary Clinton. But by the same margin, she was more popular than him among their female counterparts, 54 to 42%. What about age? If you look at younger voters here, Hillary Clinton much more popular than Donald Trump. But he was more popular than her among voters aged over 45. Some of these differences are really stark, nowhere more stark than on race. Trump more popular among whites by 58 to 37%, but a massive margin for Hillary Clinton among black voters. Trump only had 8%. Mind you, didn't stop him winning the election. With Hispanic voters, yes, Clinton had a lead, but Trump still managed, despite all the controversy, to get 29% of them voting for him on the night. So now we look at the chronology, and I'll take you to our virtual Washington Monument so we can see the story of the night as it unfolded. And it began with very much a sense that it was probably going to be Hillary Clinton's time. Have a look at the first results we saw. This is 2 o'clock in the morning, and you can see these states coming in, predictably blue for the Democrats, states like Illinois, and then on the red side, Kansas, Alabama, Tennessee. No surprises so far. Each of them has a number, their so-called number of electoral college votes, and I'll take them and pile them up beside the virtual Washington Monument. And when the winner gets to 270, the contest is over. So far, early days, no surprises. Move on an hour and a half, though, and something shocked us all. New Mexico and Connecticut going blue as everyone expected them to, but it was Ohio that caused the shock. That had been reliably Democrat for quite some time. Now it was in the red column. The Republicans didn't win it in the 2012 election. Was something happening? Was Donald Trump on the move here? Was his strategy working? Let's pile up those electoral college votes, and now you can see his advantage. Not long after, about an hour later, Mrs. Clinton struck back with California, 55 electoral college votes, the biggest state. But then Donald Trump pulled his own surprise, winning Florida, crucial, pivotal Florida, with 29 electoral college votes. His strategy was clearly working, even in states with burgeoning numbers of ethnic minority voters. We add those votes into the system. Now he's getting very close to 270. What came next? Well, from Mrs. Clinton, it was just predictable fare. Stuff they won, states they won under Barack Obama last time and the time before. But look at the red state, Pennsylvania, with 20 electoral college votes. Another huge surprise and a huge boost for Trump. Did it give him victory? Not quite. He's just a whisker away. He's actually just Wisconsin away. That came in at 8:04 while he was speaking. Somebody whispered in his ear, "You're through the line." Wisconsin with 10 electoral college votes. Let's just see them added here. And at that point, Donald Trump knew he would be in the White House. In the end, Trump won not by building a big tent or reaching out to the center ground, but by turbocharging his core vote, chief among them older white men. It has given him a famous victory, and it puts him into that building as the 45th American president.
That was Jeremy Vine there with his assessment of the results as they were coming in overnight. So let's take a closer look at one of the key battlegrounds that Jeremy was talking about there, the state of Florida, which narrowly backed Donald Trump, despite many predictions that the high turnout among Hispanic voters would favour Hillary Clinton. So how did the battle for votes in Florida result in a Trump victory? Our correspondent, Regina Vaidyanathan, is in Cutler Bay in Florida tonight, and we can join her now.
Well, Hugh, I was at a Donald Trump rally in Tampa at the weekend where he told the crowd he was going to win this state before reminding them to go out and vote. And in essence, it's turnout which helped deliver this key battleground state for him. Even though Hillary Clinton won in the larger urban areas, in the rest of the state, Donald Trump simply outpaced her. Florida, America's Sunshine State. With its diverse population, it's seen as a microcosm of the country. Hillary Clinton won with minorities here, but not in the numbers she needed. In the small town of Cutler Bay, we met Sandra, an immigrant from Venezuela, who voted for Donald Trump.
I came here to live the American dream, not to change this country. I voted for Trump because he represents all that I know I wanted. I want a free country. I want a place to live in where we are respected.
But some people would say that Donald Trump's language during this campaign has actually been offensive to communities like yours.
Well, I did not take up any offense, and I think there is a lot of us that did not get offended by it.
Sandra worships at a church run by Pastor Robert Warren. Faith played a big part in Donald Trump's victory in Florida. More than 80% of white evangelical Christians voted for him.
His stance on abortion was very strong. And I think that people felt like he was honest and sincere. And evangelical Christians are sincere people.
The country might have been on the brink of electing its first female president, but many people didn't like, didn't trust, and ultimately didn't vote for Hillary Clinton here. And so many female voters who chose Donald Trump were prepared to overlook those lewd comments he made about women more than a decade ago.
The tapes are deplorable. I think he needed to be smacked. I think he was ignorant in saying things like that. But again, it really has nothing to do with the grand scheme of what's best for our nation.
Florida has once again picked the president, and it's here that Donald Trump's silent majority made sure their voices were heard. Regina Vaidyanathan, BBC News, Cutler Bay.
That was Regina there with the latest on the political scene in Florida. A little later in the programme, we'll be looking at the reaction from London and Brussels and Moscow, and we'll be seeing how the financial markets reacted. But first, we'll take a look at the day's other main news story in the UK, because at least 7 people were killed when a tram crashed in Croydon in South London early this morning. 51 passengers were taken to hospital, 8 of them, we think, with serious injuries. The driver of the tram was arrested. Our correspondent Robert Hall reports now from the scene.
It was a rush-hour journey on a line that carries millions every year. But tonight, the two-car tram lies on its side, close to Croydon's Sandylands station, as investigators try to establish how this tragedy unfolded. The first calls came in just after 6 this morning. Emergency responders found some injured passengers walking from the train, others still trapped beneath it.
The light went off, so everybody was just screaming, shouting, but there's about 2 people behind and beside me. They've already passed away. So I have to manage to get myself out of the door. So by the time I look at my face when I come outside, I had a big scar, and I have a lot of cut pain. So by the time they rush us to the hospital, I've been feeling the pains already.
Taye was among 51 people taken to hospital, some of them seriously injured. The death toll rose as recovery work continued. This afternoon, London Mayor Sadiq Khan arrived to be briefed by emergency crews, who told him 7 people had been confirmed dead.
My prayers, my thoughts are with family members and loved ones, but also I want to pay tribute to the hard-working men and women behind me who will be working when it gets dark as well to make sure the recovery part of this operation is a success.
Late this afternoon, police said the tram had been travelling significantly faster than allowed for this section of track. Taye has his own questions about safety on the line. For now, though, he's simply grateful to be back amongst his family.
Well, the tram involved in this tragedy relies on the actions of the driver. It doesn't have an automatic braking system if something goes wrong. Throughout the day, there's been more anecdotal evidence from travellers and from local people about what they say are uncomfortable speeds on this line. More information for the inquiry, which is now underway. Hugh.
Robert, thank you very much. Robert Hall there with the latest on that tragedy today in Croydon. A man has been shot dead by firearms officers in Bedfordshire. Police say they were called to a property in Luton after reports that a woman had been assaulted. A 24-year-old man was pronounced dead in hospital. The Independent Police Complaints Commission has started an investigation. A woman who has spina bifida and a couple who look after their severely disabled grandson have won their Supreme Court appeals against the so-called bedroom tax. The court ruled that the government's changes to housing benefit discriminated against them. But 5 other people had similar challenges dismissed by the court. Now, there's more reaction to the election of Donald Trump as US President. In Downing Street today, Prime Minister Theresa May said that Britain and America's special relationship would endure based on trade and security and defence. Mr. Trump has indicated that he would consider a trade agreement with the UK after Britain leaves the EU. But there is concern that Mr. Trump may take America out of some international agreements which involve the UK. Our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, reports now on the likely impact on the United Kingdom.
This is going to be Brexit plus. Brexit plus.
Not long ago, that term, Brexit, didn't mean much to many.
I think it's going to be a Brexit plus, plus, plus.
Not long ago, few dreamed that he would be in charge.
It'll be called Brexit plus, plus, plus. Mr. Nigel Farage.
But did American voters, told they could kick the establishment, follow Britain's lead?
Thank you very much. The political revolution of 2016 is that in 2 massive campaigns, the underdogs beat the establishment. We did it in Brexit, and Trump did it last night in the USA.
There were echoes in Trump's campaign of the Brexiteers' attacks on the elite. This crowd at the UK's US Embassy last night about as establishment as you can get. There are parallels between the referendum and this Republican victory. Voters sharply divided by gender, race and background. But beyond the result, how will our relationship with our most important ally change?
Britain and the United States share values of freedom, of democracy and enterprise, and I look forward to building on the special relationship we have between our 2 countries to ensure the security and prosperity of our 2 nations in the future.
All right, now have you all got a good one? The Prime Minister will need more than a posh hat to forge the kind of closeness that so often defined our links. That so-called special relationship, a source of both hope and despair, when Theresa May and nearly every British politician expressed doubts about the new president before today.
He just doesn't understand the United Kingdom and what happens in the United Kingdom.
I think Donald Trump is clearly out of his mind, if you think that's a sensible way to proceed.
And grim faces today.
After a very nasty and divisive campaign that President-elect Trump has run, he's now got to try and bring people together and unite the whole country.
It's not the result that I wanted, but I think it points to a wider issue across the globe right now.
Feels a bit like the end of the world.
Having supported Brexit, Donald Trump might play nice with number 10. Theresa May is likely to visit his White House early next year. But as political creatures, they could hardly be more different. It's not easy to see how Theresa May and Donald Trump will see eye to eye. President-elect Trump's biggest involvement on our turf? Jetting in to build Scottish golf courses, making a huge impression, not always good, sometimes tangling with the locals.
Sorry, Mr. Trump, I meant to.
But even this, from our new closest ally, became a circus with Donald Trump. Just imagine what might be next. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, the Prime Minister was one of many world leaders throughout the day who sent their good wishes and congratulations to Mr. Trump. Among them was President Putin, who said he hoped that Russia and the USA could work together to move relations beyond what he said was the current state of crisis. During the campaign, Mr. Trump's views on foreign affairs, including on Syria, China and links with NATO, were often seen as controversial and at odds with President Obama's own policies. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, assesses the potential global impact of a Trump presidency.
The president-elect inherits a world fraught with risk, where American might is challenged. A new Cold War confrontation with Russia in Syria and Ukraine, threats from so-called Islamic State, nuclear ambitions in North Korea, and China is rising. It's also a world which looks to America to lead on everything from trade to climate change. Russia's Putin was one of the first to send congratulations. Mr. Trump calls him a strong man he can work with.
It is not our fault that Russia-US relations are in the state they are in now, but Russia is ready and wants to restore fully fledged relations with the US.
Mr. Trump could bring in Russia from the cold. The first test, Syria's war. Moscow is warning of another major assault against the rebels in Aleppo to strengthen its ally, President Assad. Mr. Trump says President Assad is bad, but warns the rebels, now backed by Washington, could be worse. He's ready to work with the Syrian and Russian leaders on his main goal, defeating the so-called Islamic State, or ISIS. That worldview is troubling for some.
I am worried about the relationship he seems to have, admiration, the inability to criticize Putin, the inability to actually see what Putin is doing. I mean, he went out, again, another one of the untruths. Putin is killing ISIS. No, he's not. He's not killing ISIS at all. He's actually trying to keep the Assad regime in power.
The president-elect questions America's old alliances, especially NATO. That's another test on another front. Ukraine. The US is working with NATO partners against what it calls Russian aggression, sending troops to defend allies along Moscow's borders. Mr. Trump criticizes the mission and the money. The US spends twice as much on defense as 27 other NATO members combined. NATO knows that.
He has focused on defense spending, and I think that's fair. Because many European allies are investing too little in defense. Therefore, it is so important to see that actually in Europe, more countries are now investing more in defense.
Many world leaders are surprised, even shocked, that the man who knows little about dealing with major world crises has defeated the woman who knows a lot. Now, some argue that could create new opportunities to find new ways to resolve long-standing conflicts, like here in Syria. But the first to welcome a President Trump are those who want to see America's retreat from its role as the global superpower. Mr. Trump, the candidate, pledged to make America great again. He's described as isolationist, ideological. Will Mr. Trump, the president, present a different face to the world.
One thing is the electoral campaign and one thing is being president. In some cases there is a certain continuity of messages, in some others there might be a rethinking. But I'm convinced that what unites us in terms of interests of our citizens is more than what can take us apart.
Mr. Donald J. Trump.
Come January, when Trump Air is replaced by Air Force One, the new president and commander-in-chief will travel a world where American leadership matters. The question being asked now is, what kind of leader will he be? Lise Doucette, BBC News.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the global reaction. In a moment, we'll talk to our Europe editor, Katya Adler, who's in Brussels. But first, let's go to Moscow and talk to my colleague there, Steve Rosenberg. And Steve, how would you characterise the response there in Moscow when the news came through?
A very positive reaction indeed, Hugh. Let me give you one example. Earlier today, I went down to the Russian Foreign Ministry, and I don't remember seeing officials there looking so happy, so relaxed and smiling as much as they were, clearly encouraged by the news coming out of America. And that is because Moscow believes that a President Trump will be good for Russia. Why is that? Well, let's look at the situation today. The current US administration portrays Russia as a threat. It often criticises what it describes as Russian aggression in Ukraine and in Syria. It has put sanctions on Moscow. And yet very soon there will be a new president in the White House, Donald Trump, who has publicly praised Vladimir Putin's style of leadership. He's called for closer ties between Moscow and Washington. He seems to see eye to eye with Vladimir Putin on many issues, including the war on terror. And I think the Russians really do believe that Donald Trump is a pragmatist and he's a businessman that they can do business with.
Steve, thanks very much. Let's go from Moscow to Brussels. And Katya, is that cheerful, positive response in Moscow shared by European leaders?
Well, actually, in Europe here, Hugh, Germany again appeared to take the European lead. Of course, all EU leaders sent messages of congratulations to Donald Trump today, even if through gritted teeth, as political etiquette demands. But Chancellor Merkel alone made her pledge of continued close cooperation conditional on Donald Trump respecting equal rights. Of course, she is a female politician known to champion the rights of minorities and heading soon towards her own election, an election in her own country. And that deafening roar of 1 million of anti-establishment, nationalist-minded US voters has European leaders worried about their own backyard, where there is growing popular anger against the political elite. Suddenly, for example, the prospect of a far-right labelled French President Le Pen seems a far more likely prospect. And those populist leaders, so-called populist leaders across Europe, from France to Italy, Netherlands, Germany and beyond, they were delighted today. They've been dismissed for decades by the liberal mainstream as political pariahs, and they now point to the United States and say, if Donald Trump can do it in the powerful US, then watch out, Europe. This is a wake-up call for Europe. It's frighteningly shocking for some, but for others, it's exciting and emboldening.
Katya, thank you very much. Katya Adler, our Europe editor there in Brussels, and Steve Rosenberg, our correspondent in Moscow. Well, let's talk about the financial reaction, because stock markets across Europe fell sharply on the news of Mr. Trump's victory. Then they rose later in the day. In the currency markets, the value of the dollar fell. Many analysts are waiting to see whether Mr. Trump will deliver on his promises to abandon global free trade agreements. Kamal Ahmed reports now on the economic impact of the Trump victory.
It was not a death knell for the markets, but a day of volatility followed by calm. A benign reaction as investors wait to see if there actually is a difference between what Donald Trump says, tough on free trade, tough on immigration, and how he'll actually govern.
We don't know what he's going to do, right? He's a hot ticket. What is he really going to? Is he going to now temper his whole posture? Did he say all that stuff just to get those disenchanted votes, right? Or is he actually going to follow through?
The reaction of the markets surprised many. The S&P index of America's 500 biggest firms was up by 1%, and the UK's FTSE 100, after a sharp dip, ended up rising also by 1%. But the value of gold was on the up by 5%, as investors looked for a safe haven for their money.
Donald J. Trump!
Mr. Trump argues his policies, cutting taxes, boosting spending, will lead to faster economic growth. Economists say he might be right, in the short term at least.
There should be some help from infrastructure spending and tax cuts and so on. Longer term, the US is very heavily indebted economies which are relatively mature in terms of the economic cycles always have a risk of possibly going into recession. And that recession risk becomes bigger if it turns out that Donald Trump is partly responsible for a dismantling of the global trading system.
Let's take a look at Donald Trump's economic plan. First, he has promised to spend $600 billion on infrastructure, fixing America's transport links. That could mean increased borrowing, which might spook the markets. Second, Mr. Trump wants to see $4.4 trillion of tax cuts, personal and business. How he funds those is not absolutely clear. Third, new import tariffs of up to 45% against countries like China and Mexico. Mr. Trump has also threatened to abandon global free trade agreements, and less free trade can lead to lower growth. Sparkling lights in New York last night, and there is certainly a mood of optimism among many. But for business leaders, opportunity comes with risk.
You could build a case that a Trump administration will stimulate infrastructure investment, will lower taxes, will encourage companies to bring back profits from abroad, and that might not be bad for the US economy on its own. On the other hand, obviously, we have to watch what happens in relation to free trade or restricting free trade.
On the markets, this might be something of a phony peace. Investors are watching and waiting to see if Mr. Trump really wants to rip up the rulebook or play a much steadier game. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
Well, here in Washington, D.C., there is a strong view, even among some Republicans, that the most divisive element of the Trump campaign was his attitude to immigration. He called Mexicans rapists and repeatedly promised to build a wall on the US border with Mexico. So where does that leave the 65% of Hispanic voters who backed Hillary Clinton? Our correspondent James Cook has been getting reaction from Hispanic voters near the border between California and Mexico. We can join him now.
Yes, thanks very much indeed, Hugh. As you say, Mr. Trump, during the campaign, repeatedly pledged to build that big, beautiful wall all the way from here in California, 2,000 miles to Texas. Not only that, but he insisted that Mexico would pay for it and he would renegotiate trade deals between this country and Mexico over there, as we've just heard. The Mexican president, Enrique Peña Nieto, has called Mr. Trump to congratulate him, but his government has made it clear it will be fighting at least some of those plans. Is a country built on immigration about to pull up the drawbridge? Securing this border was the very essence of Donald Trump's strategically brilliant but deeply divisive campaign.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. We're gonna build the wall, folks. Don't worry about it. Who's gonna pay for the wall? Who?
Now it's the people here who must face the consequences. Hispanics on the border are troubled, unsettled, unsure about what comes next.
Mexico has a really good relationship with the United States with manufacturing, especially here in Tijuana and the border. You got Toyota, you got Samsung, you got Medtronic.
He says he wants to bring them all back.
Yeah, he says he wants to bring them all back, but I don't see with what money he's going to do that.
A lot of people like tourism going that way is low, so now this might be even lower.
And what about the wall?
The wall, I'm scared of the wall. I don't know. I'm scared of the wall. I just hope they don't make us build it.
Barack Obama has deported more people than any president in history. His successor, though, has pledged to go much, much further, rounding up and expelling more than 11 million undocumented migrants. Business owners like Edith Robledo think that is simply absurd.
Once you're elected, once you wake up with that responsibility on your shoulders, you have to change your ways. You have to understand that you have the responsibility of millions and millions of Americans.
But having ridden a foaming white wave of resentment to power, can the president-elect back down now? This journalist thinks he can and he will.
What he's starting to do is soften his approach, and unfortunately he gets to say, well, I said those things during the campaign, but I didn't really mean them, or they're not really possible. And that's what the bad part about politics is, it allows people to say whatever they want during campaigns and then not have to fulfill those promises.
Not everyone here is so optimistic. On this dusty border, there is something in the air, and it is fear. For many voters here, disgust has turned to despair. James Cook, BBC News, on the Mexican border in San Diego.
And with James's words there, let's go back to New York and talk to John Sopel once again, our North America editor. Let's talk about the next 4 years, John, and the tone of this Trump presidency. Is the tone likely to be less hostile, less confrontational than the tone of the campaign?
There was a former governor of New York, Hugh, who said you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. Donald Trump campaigned with a flamethrower in one hand and a flick knife in the other. Yet last night he presented a very different picture of himself to the American people. Conciliatory, unifying, wanting to bring people together. But if you look at the policies that we've covered over the course of this bulletin that he's been talking about, whether it be the border, whether it be immigration, whether it be the extreme vetting of Muslims coming into the country, getting rid of Obama's health policies, these are policies that are divisive. And I think at this stage, we simply can't make a judgment on which Donald Trump it will be who will govern the American people. Will it be the person we saw on the campaign trail, or will it be the person we heard from last night, striking a very different note?
Tomorrow, John, we will see Mr. Trump here at the White House. He'll be greeted by the president. They're talking about a smooth transition. What kind of transition do you think it'll be?
President Obama has made it clear that he wants the transition to be as smooth as possible, that he will do everything he can to help. I mean, I think there'll be a kind of certain frisson between them when they don't have a lot of respect for each other. And Barack Obama must look at Donald Trump's policies and think, you are trying to undo every bit of my legacy. I think the most important thing that might happen with Donald Trump is something which might seem kind of rather abstruse and constitutional, which is appointments to the Supreme Court. There is one vacancy at the moment. There may be 2 others in the 4 years. They decide on things like abortion, on gun reform, on immigration. And those are social changes that could affect America for decades. The election of Donald Trump is a very big deal indeed.
John, once again, thank you very much. John Sopel there, our North America editor, with his thoughts for us tonight in New York. And that's it from Washington, D.C. after a tumultuous 24 hours, one of the biggest upheavals in the nation's political history. For the first time in over 60 years, Americans have elected a president with no previous experience of public office. A businessman and television celebrity has defied the polls to become the 45th president of the United States. In a moment, it'll be time for the news where you are, but we are going to leave you tonight with some images from the life of President-elect Donald J. Trump. Good night.
I always find that the smart people survive and the smart people do well. There was a story in the paper that the Queen of England was going to leave Buckingham Palace and move into Trump Tower. I want to run one term and I want to do the right job. Straighten out Social Security, get the trade deficits in order, and lower taxes. You're fired.
We're all commodities. I'm a commodity. I am officially running for President of the United States. We're going to build the wall, folks. Don't worry about it. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. Like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you. And we will make America great again. God bless you and good night.
A night of history starts right now.
Now it's time for America to bind the wounds of division. Have to get together.